Hey, Rob Veno here, Rob Veno Sports. Midday, February 2nd, Tuesday. We're going to take about a 30-minute look here at some games across the college basketball landscape tonight. A few games with some major injury concerns, other games that are very notable in Power 5 conference plays, all types of stuff going on tonight. Did I say conference plays? Conference play there. All kinds of stuff going on tonight on the board. We've seen some movement in plenty of these games. So let's get right to it. Game 7-11, 7-12. Drake's at Indiana State tonight. Game open 12-145. We see now at Chris the number 10 and 142.5 the total for Drake. 6 consecutive games now up and over the total, and in that mix, just to show how poor their defense has been during this run, they allowed 70 points to a punchless Bradley squad in their last outing, and also allowed 68 to Loyola of Illinois, which doesn't have much punch either. Those two real indicators that Drake defensively has fallen off the cliff here. Over the course of their last 9 games, they've given up 70 or more in 8 of those. Total here surprisingly has come down because Indiana State's 7-2 over the total in their last 9 as well. These two teams played earlier this season. Indiana State wins that game 79-69, a 148 total, which is over this one, what's posted right now. Maybe a slight lean there toward the over, but money sees it the exact opposite way. They've come in hard and come in hard on the under. Ball State at Bowling Green this evening. Interesting game here as well. The total on this one has gone up a little bit. Game open, Bowling Green 3.5, 134. We now look around and see 135.5, 136 is out there as well. For Ball State on the road this season, they've been a pretty high scoring team. 7 games, they've played 4 overs, averaging 145.2 points per game on the road for Bowling Green, 140.8 per game at home. Both of those numbers higher than the 135.5 that's posted here today. Ball State on a run of 4 consecutive overs. MAC conference play in full force tonight. A lot of important games around that league. Interestingly enough, Bowling Green, a team that has played pretty well as of late. I'd expect to see them perform well here. Numbers sits, like I say, at 3 right now. You can probably find some 3.5s out there if you like the other side, but my tendency here would be to look at the Bowling Green side. Good team, good offense. Both teams 13-8 straight up, but Bowling Green definitely the better team as far as backing financially has been concerned this year. 9-8 against the spread as opposed to 6-9 for Ball State. Western Michigan takes on Toledo. In what should be a high-paced game. Obviously, the total indicates that 6.5. Toledo the favorite here as we speak. 153 the total for the Toledo team. Not quite as quick as Western Michigan, but both of these teams do play at a decent pace. So that's why you see the total where it is. Pretty efficient, both sides here. I prefer Western Michigan at home more than I do on the road. Toledo, a tough team at home. A lot of these MAC home courts extremely tough, but Toledo, a tough place to play. Certainly Western Michigan off of a big win last time out, 94-86 over Eastern Michigan. For Toledo, it was a 73-68 loss to Buffalo. So if you're looking for a bit of a bounce back play here, you would probably look at the home team, Toledo. Perhaps that's why the game's going up just a little bit here, from 6 to 6.5. Tough matchup here, but I do think a bounce back for Toledo should be in order. Akron's going to take on Ohio U. Another MAC game tonight at Ohio U. The Akron Zips opened a 1.5-point favorite. We've got a full switch here. Ohio U now the 2-point favorite. Total open 150.5. Total now down to 147. Really not much of an opinion on this game. I kind of like what Saul Phillips has done as head coach at Ohio U. Certainly Akron has been dominant all season long, 17-4 straight up. Both teams have been profitable against the spread. So it kind of evenly matched, but the home floor could be a little bit of an edge for Ohio U. Certainly bettors find Ohio U to be the side here. Like I say, to switch favorites in a game like this, especially with Akron at 17-4, not the most common thing in the world, but it goes to show you that inside the MAC, these teams are really evenly matched at the top of this conference. So it wouldn't surprise me to see the home team win here. Did not play the game. Total, I thought at 150.5 was probably too high. I know Ohio U's been a pretty good offensive team this season, but I do like Akron from a defensive standpoint. Keith Denbrock, the head coach there, has focused on defense during his tenure at Akron. So in a big game like this on the road, the old saying is defense travels. I believe Akron can at least slow Ohio U down a little bit. Whether or not that's enough to win the game is another story, because Ohio U's an explosive offensive team. But I do feel that the movement toward the under here, the strong movement toward the under, is the correct way in that game. Kent State's going to take on Central Michigan, another MAC game here. Like I said earlier, the entire conference is in play. But we do have a situation here for Kent State where they're going to be without two of their starters and possibly their sixth man as well. Starting guards, Xavier Pollard and Jalen Walker, both out of this game. For Pollard, it's going to be 6 weeks that he'll be out. Tough loss for Kent State because Pollard is their number 3 scorer. Walker also averages 7.9 points per game. He's in a walking boot right now. He's out. Plays 19 minutes. Pollard, of course, as I mentioned, the number 3 scorer on the team. They could very well be without their 6th man in this game as well. So you're talking about 2 starters and your 6th man. That's a lot to overcome, especially on the road. Now, Kent State faced this situation without 2 of their starters on Saturday and went to Ohio U, lost by 10 in that game. Lost by 11 in that game. Dion Edwin, the 6th man off the bench, had his knee drained prior to that game just to be able to play. That's why he's a bit of a question mark here in this one. Certainly when you have to have your knee drained, there's a significant injury there. So you're talking about 2 guys with extreme injuries that start for you. You're talking about Edwin with an injury that could, if not prevent him from playing, it certainly could limit his effectiveness. And for Kent State, interesting to read a little bit about the situation here. Kent State had actually built their perimeter on a size basis. The height advantage that the missing players now gave them along the perimeter was great for their defense. Now, not only do they have to play a couple of inexperienced guys, they have 1 starter left in the backcourt, but they have to play a couple of inexperienced guys. They're really small now. You're talking about nobody taller than 6'2" around the perimeter at this point. When they were throwing a couple of 6'4s and a 6'5 out there at you, now it's a little more tough sledding on the defensive end for Kent State. Obviously, I mentioned the offensive numbers that they lose in this injury situation here. Pollard and Walker combined to give them 21 points a game. Tough go here for Kent State. Those close to the program think that the remainder of this schedule is going to be very tough for them. Central Michigan is a high-octane team that at home can really run up some big scores, and you have to imagine that they're going to try and take it to Kent State here. This line has acted kind of funny all day long. Bounced back from 6 to 5.5, back to 6, back to 5.5. Um, Kent State's a very, very tough team, and they have a good, solid veteran leader in Jimmy Hall. Whether or not they can band together and come close in this game against Central Michigan, a team that at home has been defeating opponents by 12.5 points per game on the season. It's another story. Pollard did give an emotional speech from what I read to his team after he suffered the injury. And we'll see if Kent State can somehow find a way to piece things together and pick up a couple wins down the stretch here. But it's a tough time for a team that sits atop the MAC standings and now faces a real challenge the rest of the way. Next game up, Miami of Ohio against Eastern Michigan. And here we have another significant injury situation. Miami of Ohio starting guard Eric Washington, their leading scorer on the team, just a shade under 15 points per game. He's been out the last couple of games with an ankle injury. Miami of Ohio was able to overcome that and win on Saturday. They expected him back for tonight's game. However, he was suspended, a one-game suspension handed to Eric Washington. And so now against Eastern Michigan, an extremely fast team, especially at home. This team loves to play pace, mid-70s as far as possessions per game are concerned, averaging about 83.5 per contest at home. EMU against the Miami of Ohio team that's offensively challenged to begin with certainly has a huge leg up now. This game moved from an opener of 8.5 all the way to 10.5 now. It's a little bit difficult to get behind Eastern Michigan and lay that type of price, 10.5. The power ratings made this game 8 if everything were equal, so I do think the absence of Washington probably does warrant a 2-point swing in the line towards EMU, but this is not a team that really dominates opponents. It's a lower echelon team in the MAC conference. Fundamentally, though, you have to think that they're going to run. Miami shorthanded, not great guard play. I think that could be troublesome. Probably a injury call going on right there for me in the background. We'll pick that one up later. Let's skip right down here to LSU and Auburn. We all know LSU had that big game against Oklahoma on Saturday. Wind up losing a game that they could have won. Auburn played without their star players, Simeon Bowers against Oklahoma State on Saturday in that SEC Big 12 challenge. Auburn did not shoot the ball well in that game. Obviously, without Bowers, they had no inside play. A lot of stagnant stuff around the perimeter. Didn't go good for Auburn. Bowers will be back tonight. LSU, this is not a game that they can lose. Certainly, they need every win they can get at this point in time. I think the good showing against Oklahoma helps them on Saturday, but they need to rack up some wins now, and certainly heading into Auburn, this will be one that they have to have. Game opened LSU 7.5 all the way down to LSU only 5.5 now. A lot of that due to Bowers being in the lineup here tonight, I would think. But LSU still 5.5 points better than Auburn. I'd expect Auburn to shoot a lot better here tonight. They can be a good offensive team at times, and I think against this LSU team, which doesn't play a heck of a lot of defense, this could be one. Auburn ranks 14th defensively in a 14-team SEC conference, so obviously their defense is nowhere to be found. But LSU ranks 12th. So you got two of the worst defenses in the SEC here. A couple of fast-paced offenses. If you get any type of shooting whatsoever, should see a high-scoring game here. Also, I think you need to note that LSU, a team that attacks, Auburn has guards who attack. Could see a lot of whistles in this one as well. Game sits right now at 5.5, 158 the total, down from 161. So bettors like Auburn and the under. I think possibly the 161 was picked on because as we've gone on here into the early stages of February, the last few days we have seen conference games played a little bit lower scoring, a few more unders showing up now. There's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously, we're getting into a more intense part of the season here, conference season. But odds makers have thoroughly adjusted now to where totals are concerned. So some of these totals are a little bit overpriced, and games are falling a shade under. I think that's why guys are shaving all these high numbers down, these excessively high numbers down. We've seen a lot of that the last 3-4 days. Kentucky's at Tennessee tonight. Tennessee and Rick Barnes flailing at this point in time. Kentucky had a chance to beat Kansas on Saturday, did not get it done. That was a tough loss for them. They had a pretty good lead in that game, but the overtime came, and in overtime, Wayne Selden and company took over, and so much for Kentucky in that game. But I think that we're finding with the Kentucky Wildcats that as the season goes on, they're progressing. And the rest of the SEC needs to be a bit wary of Kentucky as we go through the rest of the season here, because this is a team under John Calipari that did not have the same talent as he's had with his incoming freshman classes the last couple of years. But this team is starting to get it. They look a little bit better. They opened here 7.5 with a total of 153.5. They've risen to an 8-point favorite right now, total of 152. Going down a little bit, Tennessee's been very high scoring for the majority of the season, dependent upon guard play. And I think Calipari's team can take some of that away from Tennessee here tonight. I'm not willing to lay 8 points, but I do think Kentucky is in a much better place than Tennessee is right now. Head coach Rick Barnes, like I say, his club flailing as of late. They've lost their last 2, both straight up and against the spread. And what's more concerning is that, for a Tennessee team that had a little bit of promise, these last 2 losses come to Alabama and TCU. Tennessee going to TCU for that SEC Big 12 Challenge really wasn't supposed to be a loss. They were favored in that game. They get beat badly. They get beat by 12, only shoot 33% from the field. 2 consecutive games now where Tennessee has not shot 34% from the floor. Those types of numbers aren't going to win them any games. Their defense has held up steady over the course of the last 5, but the offense certainly letting them down. I think that's because they're so dependent upon the perimeter. Look for Kentucky to try and take that away here tonight. Next SEC game on the board, South Carolina at Georgia, game 727, 728. You go through South Carolina's schedule, and the record is really shiny. 19-2 straight up, 13-5 against the spread. But personally, I still feel this team has not been tested. Not tested to the degree that they need to be tested to be considered a real contender for the SEC championship. And Frank Martin's done a great job. Take nothing away from what he's done there in Columbia, South Carolina this season. Take nothing away from the players. They've become a faster-paced team, 75 possessions per game, scoring on everybody. But I still feel like they've had the benefit of the schedule in conference play as well to this point. And, excuse me, if you just take a look at a couple of the losses that they've had that came in conference, you kind of get the idea that they haven't been tested. They lose at Tennessee, a team we just talked about that's not playing great ball right now. Tennessee beats them 78-69. And then prior to that, a couple of games, they lose by 23 to Alabama. So I'm just not sure if you're losing to those types of teams inside conference and on the road that you're capable of going to Georgia, where Mark Fox's team will grind one out. They'll certainly try and take those 75 possessions per game that the Gamecocks average and limit those to maybe, 66, 67, and see if their guard trio can get something done here. Georgia hasn't been good offensively all season long. They've come alive in spurts, but consistency's been a key issue. I think they're probably a good side here. Now, bettors have moved this number within the last 90 minutes from An opener of Pick'em to South Carolina -1.5. You know, there was a point where Georgia was the 2-point favorite. It came off the pick, went to Georgia -2. Now it's come back the other way to South Carolina -1.5. Totals stayed the same at 141. Not sure I agree with the movement here in the line. I thought the earlier movement toward Georgia was the right move. Have not played this game yet, but I'll tell you what, in a situation where you could take 1.5 points, could be a good play here on Georgia at home as the home dog against South Carolina. Rhode Island's at Massachusetts. Rhode Island, much like a couple of the teams we talked about earlier that have significant injuries, well, they took it on the chin against St. Joe's over the weekend. They had two starters really banged up in that game. Point guard Jarvis Garrett, the leading scorer on the team, took a flagrant foul, winds up with a jaw injury. The prognosis for him and tonight are not good. I wouldn't expect to see Jarvis Garrett in this game. Forward Karan Iverson, the fifth leading scorer on the team. Remember now, Rhode Island has 5 double-digit scorers, all between 13 and 10 points. A very, very well-balanced offense. Iverson, number 5 in team scoring at 10.4 points per game. He took a flagrant foul and wound up with a concussion. Now, earlier in the day, Rhode Island head coach Danny Hurley said that these two players would probably be out for an indefinite period of time. He backtracked on that a little bit about 10 minutes later and said that he's not completely ruling them out, especially Iverson. But I don't know that Iverson's going to make it through concussion protocol. I think Danny Hurley probably just slipped with his early quote, tried to cover it up on the back end. Bettors seem to see it the same exact way because this line has come crashing down. Rhode Island opened 6, which was probably too high to begin with. Power ratings made this game only Rhode Island 4.5 with everybody involved. But it's come down now from 6 to 2.5. 144 the opening total down to 143.5. Let's face it, Massachusetts is what Massachusetts always is. They're a pressing 94-foot up-tempo style team. They just don't do it very well this year. 8-12 on the season, only 1 win in conference play. But they're going to get a real shot here against Rhode Island without their starting point guard and leading scorer Jarvis Garrett. You take a piece like that away from a team, it's to some people semi-remarkable that Hurley's been able to do what he's done with this team when they lost their best player, E.C. Matthews, to start the season. Now you're going to take Garrett away. You're also going to take Iverson away. This is a tough game for Rhode Island, now down to only laying 2.5. Massachusetts hasn't beaten many people. Like I say, only 1 winning conference. But boy, if their style fundamentally can take advantage of the missing point guard here, Garrett for Rhode Island, an outright win could be in the cards. Games come down an awful lot, though, from 6 to 2.5. We'll have to look at that one with a little more scrutiny. I think if you're going to look at that game just off the top of my head, you might want to go to look at the first half where you see Rhode Island's a 1-point favorite. And if Massachusetts comes out of the gates, which you would expect here, you would expect Massachusetts to come out of the gates knowing what they're facing here personnel-wise and knowing that they could have an advantage with their style. If they come out quick, +1 for the first half might be a way to go. Like I say, I'll look at that one with a little more scrutiny and possibly end up on UMass first half in that game. Georgetown out of the Big East going to take on Butler, game 7:31, 7:32. Big game for both. Obviously, neither one has solidified anything as far as NCAA tournament is concerned. It's been a tough conference all season long. It's a big game for both of these teams. I don't really have a solid opinion here which way to go. I would like Butler at home in the field house, and the 5.5 or excuse me, the 5 that they're laying is a shade less than the 5.5 that the power rating suggests they should be favored by. Totals come down from 145.5 to 142.5. Remember, Butler started the season like an offensive house on fire, and their numbers offensively have come down since then. Going to be interesting here. I feel like they've got a big offensive game in them, and remember that handicapping sports, a lot of times, when you've done it as long as I have, 23 years now, in this business professionally, a lot of times it comes down to gut feel. And to me, it seems like Butler's sitting on a big offensive game. Uh, we'll see how this one goes, but I'm not willing to play it either way at this point in time. I think if I were to play it, I'd probably look at over 142.5. Money has pushed that number down hard from 145.5 down to 142.5. 3-point movement in the number. I think at this point maybe there's some value in take back over 42.5. But again, just a thought at this point in time, not really a play. We'll see. Look at it the rest of the day before tip off. Maybe get involved. Virginia Tech's going to play Syracuse here tonight. Syracuse been playing better under Jim Boeheim, better defense. You look up, you see they're 15-8 straight up, 11-11 against the spread. They've been pretty much under the radar all season long, but now they're starting to play better ball. Wondering if Buzz Williams' team is good enough to shoot over the zone here and force Jim Boeheim out of the zone. Remember, Syracuse wasn't real effective defensively early in the season, but it seems that since Boeheim has gotten back to the bench, they've gotten a little bit better here. More traditional 2-3 zone results posted by Syracuse in recent games. I think that for Virginia Tech, a team that's allowed 91 and 90 points in their last 2 games, could be troublesome. They've really missed Chris Clark since the end of December, on the defensive end mostly. Buzz Williams has tried to get this team to win games by outscoring opponents. He's been effective in some instances. They are a team that's 5-1 against the spread, so it's not like this team has laid down for anybody. They've found ways to score points. My question here is just when you come against a team that's going to give you 40 minutes of zone, can you find ways to crack that zone? And I'm just not sure. I guess you could point to the 83 points scored against Louisville, which is a hard-nosed defensive team, but again, not much zone out of Coach Pitino. It's strictly man-to-man over there. So this will be a different beast thrown at them tonight. We'll see how they handle it. Clemson's going to take on Wake Forest. Talk about a team, that doesn't play any defense. Danny Manning's Wake Forest bunch has been terrible defensively all season long. Will Clemson take advantage of that? Most likely. Will Clemson get sped up by Wake Forest on Wake Forest home floor? That's the question, because if you think this game's going to go at pace, if Wake Forest can dictate pace, then I think the 140 total number is too low. But if you think Clemson can go on the road and dictate to Wake how the game is going to be played, then the 140 appears to be too high. I don't see anybody this season that really dictates pace to Wake Forest. Wake Forest, a team that gets about 73.5 possessions per game, fairly efficient basketball team, just as I mentioned, not good on the defensive end. And Clemson does have enough scores to take advantage there. So to me, the 140 is a bit intriguing. Wake Forest is a team that is always an upset waiting to happen just because they have the puncher's chance to be able to outscore you. Don't know if they'll do it here. Again, there's some difficult games on the schedule here this evening, and this one of them. I'll tell you what, if you're a first half player, something to note is the 4-14 spread mark. Straight up mark posted by Wake Forest this season. Now, for a team that's 4-14 straight up, 18 games, lost 14 of the first half straight up, and they're only getting a half a point tonight, probably want to look against that. But I think that Wake Forest, like I said earlier, as far as game is concerned, they always have that puncher's chance, and Clemson's prone to scoring slumps. So a lot of interesting ways to look at that game. But the 4-14 first half straight up mark by Wake Forest certainly doesn't bode well when you're only getting half a point in the first half. Todd Simon and his UNLV team go to New Mexico to play New Mexico. New Mexico, pretty good health right now. They had some injury situations. Funny, New Mexico's worked their way up to second place in the Mountain West Conference very quietly with a 6-2 record inside the league. UNLV made the huge splash when they made the coaching change, fired Dave Rice, immediately started playing much better offensive basketball. We saw totals just get bet and bet and bet and bet to the over like there was no end to how high the game could go. A couple of those games did manage to get over the total. Recently, though, UNLV games have sat back down a little bit. 2 of their last 3 have not exceeded 130 points, have not hit 130 points, I should say. San Diego State really put the clamps on them over the weekend, 67-52. A couple of games before that, the Nevada Wolfpack put the clamps on them, 65-63. So UNLV, kind of a mixed bag here. 3 games, super offense under Todd Simon. Of course, he's let the horses run a little bit here. And a couple of games where they were stopped. New Mexico's not necessarily a team on the defensive side that's going to stop you from scoring. New Mexico has become, this year under Craig Neal, a much faster team than they were previously as far as possessions per game are concerned. You take a look at New Mexico, you see they average 74.5 possessions per game. New Mexico, in recent memory, has not been that fast a tempo team, but this year, Craig Neal has to make do with the pieces that he has. So this year he changed it up a little bit, went fast. Seems to be working from an offensive standpoint. Defensively, giving up some numbers. The points per possession are a little bit skewed because it shows you 0.96 per possession, which anything under 1 is pretty good. But New Mexico, inside conference, has given up some points to opponents here, 83 to Boise State, 86 to UNLV the first time around. Gave up 70 to Wyoming, not known as an offensive juggernaut. So kind of a mixed bag of results for New Mexico. There will be a revenge factor here. Obviously, New Mexico on their home court looking to atone for the 86-74 loss they took at Las Vegas a few games back. Bettors seem to like the UNLV side right now. Game open, New Mexico 3.5, played down to 2.5. Total started 150.5, now sits at 150. I'll tell you, my lean here is toward the over in this contest. Like I said, Craig Neal's team really, while they've been a mixed bag of results defensively, from an offensive standpoint, they haven't been stopped by hardly anybody inside the conference. So to think that UNLV will stop them here after New Mexico got 74 the first time, I don't think that's going to happen. That first game totaled 160. Now we're looking at 150. You need 75 aside to come out a winner in this game. One thing that I always look at in these conference matchups the second time around is coaches like to fix what was broken the first time. And the first time around for New Mexico, they didn't defend real well. I'd expect Craig Neal to put a focus on that. I think UNLV feels like, hey, we can get out and run and score on these guys. We did it once before. We'll do it again. So that'll be an interesting matchup there. And, of course, for UNLV to allow 74 points to New Mexico, they probably want to play a little better defense too. So I think both coaches will focus to their teams or present the message to their teams that they need to play better defense in this game. Just don't know whether or not that's going to apply with these two. I think we might see another offensive shootout. 150, boy, you don't see many games anymore where you can catch in the 140s. The baseline has been lifted. As I said earlier, odds makers have adjusted, and now we're dealing with a game at 150. Still think that 75 aside might not be too much to ask for those two teams. TCU off the big win on Saturday, as we talked about earlier, over Tennessee. They're on the road against Oklahoma, who rode the three-point shooting of Buddy Hield and Isaiah Cousins to victory over LSU on Saturday. The come-from-behind victory. Now Oklahoma's back inside the Big 12 Conference, 19-point favorites. That line remains the same. Total open 145.5, now down to 144. Hey, listen, TCU just hasn't been a good offensive team all season long, and I think that Oklahoma will probably, this to me is like a little bit of a breather game for OU. You have that big, hype, built-up game against LSU on Saturday. Have to use all your energy to come back and win it. And now 3 days later, you're at home against TCU, and you're a 19-point favorite. TCU, perhaps the worst team in the Big 12 this year. So for Oklahoma, could be a lax moment here. Is 19 worth taking? Could be. You always have to be fearful of an Oklahoma 5-minute spurt where they get the margin that they need and then possibly hang on to it. But I think situationally this one speaks to me louder than it does fundamentally. Fundamentally, no question, Oklahoma could drill TCU. But it's just one of those games where Oklahoma could be lulled into a 77-60 type of win, which would be, an under and a cover for TCU. To me, it has that kind of feel. Teams that win national championships don't have too many pitfalls in their season, but when you're playing 34 games, boy, oh boy, there's going to be a couple of lax moments. Perhaps this is one of them. Bradley's going to take on Missouri State. Bradley, one of the worst offensive teams in college basketball, if not the worst offensive team in college basketball. Paul Luskin, Missouri State, have been really good this season from a just a competitive nature standpoint. He's done wonders with this team, brought them back to life a little bit. Doesn't show up in their 9-13 straight up record. Doesn't really show up extremely strong in their 10-10 ATS record, but you watch them play and you realize that they have the opportunity to be in every game. They played some tough teams very good this year. Get a shot against Bradley, a team they dominated earlier in the season at Bradley. Now they're at home. Problem here is the 14 that you have to lay with Missouri State. You're looking at a game where you have to come up with maybe a 68-52, something like that, to get yourself a cover. Very possible, but it's still difficult when you're dealing with a team like Missouri State that's coming from the cellar of the Missouri Valley, moving their way up. Now, are they really ready to be 14-point favorites against a team even as bad as Bradley? The total here is what bettors have been most interested in today. Opened at 120, has climbed to 124.5. Line would suggest to you at this point in time that this one's going to land somewhere around 70-54 in favor of Missouri State. I can't really argue that. I don't want either side in that ball game. Missouri State, though, has been a team to really watch this season, to watch the rise of Missouri State this season as far as competitiveness is concerned. And perhaps when we get to conference tournament time, Arch Madness, Missouri State will be one of those teams that nobody in the conference really wants to face with Missouri State as an underdog, because they just peck away, they grind at you, and certainly they've made improvements this year. Talk about first half numbers for Bradley. They have not won a single lined game in the first half this year, 0-18, but they've covered a bunch, 8-10. Against the spread. So that's why they put the number out there. Great equalizer for Bradley tonight. In the first half, they'll be +8 with a total of 57. UL Monroe, UL Lafayette, Sunbelt action. Boy, I was amazed when I saw the opening number here of Lafayette -10.5. Hey, I know that they're an extremely potent offensive team, and I know at home they've been extremely potent, but UL Monroe, you can argue that they're the best team in that conference, or at least they're one of the three best, because Arkansas Little Rock has done amazing things this year. But UL Monroe, with the returnees, this season. They were projected to be number one in the conference. You can really argue that on paper, they're as good as anybody in this league, and they're in the in-state rivalry. Catching 10.5 against Lafayette made me do a quick double take. Since then, bettors have pushed it down to 9.5. Still awfully high. Total's risen from 147 to 149. Interesting shift in UL Monroe basketball has been the fact that all of a sudden they've started to score points. You know, they're known as a methodical, defensive-minded team, but certainly recent contests, they have really put up points, and it's been a great benefit to guys who have backed them with overplays. I actually had one of those games up and over the total, the South Alabama game, and they scored 100 points against South Alabama 3 games ago, win 100-68. But they're 4 straight wins, 4 straight covers, 4 straight over the total. The 4 straight over the total is why you see the number rise from 147 to 149, because UL Lafayette, like I said earlier, they are an offensive juggernaut this season, and at home, they're averaging 91 points per game in their 5 lined games at home. So 91 is quite a bit. Will UL Monroe try to slow them down, or will UL Monroe use their newfound offense to go at it with them? I'll tell you what, for a team that averages 91, they don't even have to be at their best to get this game over the total. Always have a little bit of hesitation, reservation, whatever you want to call it, when playing in-state rivalries up and over the total when it's this high and there is a team with defensive capabilities. Monroe is capable of trying to slow the game down and playing defensive. So that would be my one concern over playing this game over, but certainly the money hasn't had any real problems with it. Like I say, up from 147 to 149, game bet down from 10.5 to 9.5. I think that's the right way as well. UL Monroe plus those big points. Unless they really see a Raging Cajun onslaught right out of the chute and they can't find their way back into the game, then boy, 9.5 just seems large. But I think Monroe's just too veteran a group to go in there and get blasted. If I were to look at that game, I'd probably look at UL Monroe plus the points and maybe a slight look at that game going over the total. Buffalo's going to take on Northern Illinois. Interesting contest here. Buffalo open +2, now up to +3. Game's gone from 39.5 up to 141.5. Northern Illinois has not been a strong offensive team this year. Buffalo's certainly the better of the two from an offensive perspective. Northern Illinois, much better on the defensive end, though. You know, their defensive numbers overall very good, including the 38.4 field goal percentage that they allow. They're a good rebounding team, good defensive team. They're a team that's off of a loss their last time out, and I think that could spark them here tonight. The loss on Saturday was inexplicable, really. I mean, you're playing Miami of Ohio. I talked earlier about Miami of Ohio not being a very good offensive basketball team, plus the fact that their leading scorer, Eric Washington, like we said earlier, was out of that game. So no point guard, no leading scorer. He won in the same, Eric Washington. And still, Northern Illinois finds a way to lose that game. Just didn't come focused. And you're talking about a team in Northern Illinois that's 16-5 on the season. They should not be losing to Miami of Ohio. I think they regain the focus here tonight against Buffalo. I think 3's pretty cheap. To me, this is a game you need to be looking at. MAC play, Northern Illinois minus the 3. First half number, they're laying 1.5. Hey, Buffalo's a good squad, but I just think they're running into a situational thing here where Northern Illinois will be ready to defend home court. Very upset over there's no other way to describe it except the lousy loss on Saturday. So I'm probably going to take a look here at Northern Illinois. Wyoming takes on Air Force, game 747, 748. The Air Force has turned into a disaster this year, now down the bottom of the Mountain West Conference. Only one win. Wyoming has been, inconsistent, I guess is a good word to use with them. They've been mediocre this year, but they do feature the best player on the floor in this game. And I think when you have the best player on the floor in a contest like this, you're probably in pretty good shape. Josh Adams should have a field day against the Air Force defense. And, Josh Adams averaging 24 and a half points per game for Wyoming. Some big-time scoring there. For Air Force, the offense has just gone to sleep. You're talking about 3 straight games with no more than 55 points scored in any of those games. So the fact that they don't play defense very well this year, allowing 1.02 points per possession, doesn't help Air Force any. Just not a good scoring team, not a good defending team. They have lost their last 2 games by 29 and 21 points. Have not been close. Wyoming, of course, I would say San Jose State, not a team that would come in and win by 21 against Air Force, but they did. And Wyoming, certainly the caliber of San Jose State, even better. So we see a game here that opened 5, bet down to 4.5. The total's gone from 131 down to 129. Really not a situational play here to be had. I just think that the fundamentals stick. Wyoming's the better team on the offensive end. They have the better player, the best player on the floor, and Air Force is just really, really struggling right now. Wyoming, tough to lay anything with them, especially on the road. I haven't done it yet. 4.5 might be a way to go. You could be best off just to leave that game as is, but the way Air Force is struggling right now, I can't make a recommendation on them in any way, shape, or form. Alabama's going to play Mississippi State. Mississippi State at home in Starkville, open 3.5, 139. The total game's been pushed up. Mississippi State 4.5, total of 140 in this contest. Now, not thrilled with the game either way. Avery Johnson's done some good things with Alabama this year, and they've been a little back and forth, zigzag type of team. Not much to brag about on either side of the ball. For Mississippi State, I think that Ben Howland has revived the offense a little bit here. Certainly they had an easy game against Missouri last time out. Can't really judge them off of that game. Missouri's been so poor, but the offensive ability of Mississippi State right now, a team that's averaging 76.5 points per game, and the fact that Bama hasn't been a great road team, go on the road, they're 2-5 against the spread this year. I think that adds up to Mississippi State. Question being whether or not you want to lay 4.5 with Mississippi State in a game where, on paper, when you're just matching up personnel against personnel, it's a very, very even game, so anything could happen here. The power ratings suggested the line should have been Mississippi State -4. You're looking at 4.5, so probably a game sidewise to stay away from. The Bulldogs' ability to score the basketball and score at home could get that game over 140, but again, you need Alabama to come along with you, and I just don't know. Alabama could muck that game up a little bit and keep it under the total. Very, very tough game to call. Duke playing Georgia Tech. Duke, a team that has head coach Mike Krzyzewski, a little feisty during interviews right now, certainly on the downslide lately, defenseless against most opponents recently, and certainly a team that has made big news by falling out of the top 25 for the first time in, what was it, like 170 some odd weeks or 167 weeks, something crazy, but no longer a top 25 team. The Duke Blue Devils need to regroup against Georgia Tech here, who's been pretty good at home so far this season. It just seems like it sets up so well for Duke to have a big game here. We know that on the defensive end, they just can't stop people. So Georgia Tech is likely going to be able to score some. But I think that Coach Krzyzewski, after that last loss, probably gets through to his players here. Everything has to hit a rock bottom. And I think that was the rock bottom for Duke. I believe you're going to start to see a bit of an ascension here. Uh, Even in this case, if it's only a one-game ascension where Duke comes out and plays well, but I think there's no question, motivation-wise, Duke is going to be as motivated in this contest as they've been all season long. I think they're embarrassed by what's going on. These kids to be part of the first program and the first team, as I mentioned earlier, to fall out of the top 25 in, I don't know, 7 years or whatever. Have to believe that they'll play well tonight. Georgia Tech has offensive weaponry, can probably go with them. I think in the end, Duke wins 3.5. To me, a number that's manageable for Duke. Power rating said they should only be a 3-point favorite. So this number is in line. I think this is more situational than a fundamental, though, and if I had to, I would lean towards Duke. Providence is going to play DePaul. The Providence Friars, who have been very good this season behind Dunn and Bentel. One big, one small. Dunn, one of the best guards in the country. Bentel's been great interior-wise for Providence this season. They play Dave Lato's DePaul Blue Demons. Game opened Providence 7.5, 137. The total been pushed up to 8 and 140. 3-point move on that total upward. It's hard to describe what Dave Lato's doing there at DePaul. At least with Oliver Purnell, we knew that DePaul was going to race up and down the floor. Weren't capable of playing much defense. Game would be really high scoring if DePaul shot well that night. It would be a blowout of DePaul if they didn't shoot well on that night because they just didn't have any defensive presence. But Lato's kind of mixed here. Some nights we see offense and tempo out of DePaul. Other nights we don't. I think, Dave Lato's a disciple of Jim Calhoun, and I think he'd like to play Jim Calhoun's style of basketball, which was strong defense with an anchor in the middle and get out and run every time you had an opportunity. The UConn Huskies in their heyday for Jim Calhoun were a fast break team, a open floor team, which could also play some half-court offense. I don't know that Lato really has all the pieces he needs. He's got a couple of good pieces. Billy Garrett Jr., obviously a solid ball player, and that's why at times I think we see this team post good offensive numbers. The money's expecting some offense out of them tonight. Like I say, pushed up from 137 to 140 is the total for DePaul. Maybe Garrett and Henry and Tommy Hamilton able to produce points against Providence. Providence has been known, although their overall numbers defensively are good, they have been known to allow some points in games this year, so maybe the bettors are onto something there. First half number, Providence -4, total of 65.5 in that one. DePaul comes out swinging 65.5, does not look like that big of a number to exceed, so maybe we'll take a look there. West Virginia at Iowa State, both off of big games on Saturday. Iowa State, I think, I talked about this on the Sports Memo radio show with my good buddy Andrew Lang, the host of that show, and we went over the SEC Big 12 Challenge games, and I just thought that for Iowa State, the game against Texas A&M on Saturday was going to be a game where they just finally had to come up and take a breath. They had gone 1-3 to start the Big 12 conference season, and then had to rally with 4 straight wins, including a huge win over Kansas where they put all their effort into it. Then after the 4 straight wins and the huge win over Kansas, which got Iowa State right back in the thick of things, not only in the Big 12, but nationally as well. And then you have to go to Texas A&M to play a non-conference game against a team that's not just good. They're really good. And they're good defensively. And they can give a team like Iowa State problems because Iowa State lives off of their offense for the most part. Seemed to be what happened on Saturday. A&M got the win and cover. Look for the Cyclones at Hilton Coliseum to bounce back here. However, maybe we could say the same for West Virginia. They went to Florida. Michael White's team dismantled West Virginia systematically. Don't really know what the problem was there for the Mountaineers, but I do know that Florida handled whatever West Virginia could throw at them from a defensive standpoint. The problem, with West Virginia, one of the things that you do consider is when you get this deep into the season, we're now talking about 21 games into the season, and a team like West Virginia that plays every minute so hard, Press City, that you wonder if there's certain games where they just run out of gas. They're still not the best shooting team in the world. They have improved shooting-wise this year. They really need to get the turnovers and the easy buckets and get to the free throw line and make their free throws. But for the most part, they do it. But in that game Saturday, it just looked like one of those where, again, Andrew and I talked about this. Some of those games were going to be mail-ins, and it kind of looked like West Virginia didn't get it going their way to start. And as the game went on, it became one of those mail-in type games. Florida, of course, looking to improve each and every outing under Michael White and his new system. Certainly a far cry from what Billy Donovan had there. The philosophies are different. Michael White from Louisiana Tech wants to get up and down the floor more. Florida looked good. West Virginia didn't. Tonight, West Virginia opened a 4-point underdog. They're now a 5-point underdog. Game opened 158 down to 157. Again, I think that 158 down to 157 stuff is just shaving high numbers. You see something like 158 in a conference game, hey, let's bet it under. We haven't seen a real flood of money towards the under, only a 1-point move. If you go back in recent history between these two, games haven't been that high scoring. You got one or two mixed in there, but not many have been really high scoring. So something about these two when they match up has kept the point total down. First half number here, Iowa State 2.5, total of 73.5. Iowa State's been a very good first half team this season. 12-4-2. Not just straight up, but against the number. 12-4-2 against the number in the first half. Iowa State comes out of the blocks quick. We know Hilton Coliseum can be a tough place to play. ISU off a loss. 2.5-point favorite at home for the first half tonight may be a way to look. I think West Virginia's going to show pretty well here tonight and play good, but Iowa State may be too much for them to overcome. Indiana's going to take on Michigan. Big Ten game here. Michigan in their 3-point shooting barrage. Currently 18-4 straight up, 11-10 against the spread. The only reason why I mention that is because Indiana's 18-4 straight up, and they're 11-11 against the spread. So you have mirror images here in these two teams. Michigan's a 2.5-point favorite. That's where they open. That's where they sit. Game started 150.5, down to 148. Won't fool with any of this in this game. When Blackman first went down for Indiana, I thought that they were going to instantly lose a good portion of their offense. They became a solid defensive team against some weak opposition for the first 4 games or so, and I think too much credit was given to this newfound defensive ability of Indiana. It has since caved a little bit, and Indiana's become much more of what we expect them to be. Just an up-tempo team that wants to outscore you. Outscoring Michigan at home with their 3-point shooters. A little difficult. Wouldn't put it past Indiana. Don't like Michigan enough to go ahead and play them either, though. Just one of those games where I could see any outcome in that one happening. Don't have any good situationals. Don't have many good fundamentals to play that game either way. Colorado State's going to take on San Diego State, who has been the dominant force in the Mountain West Conference the last 3 weeks or so. San Diego State has once again, under Steve Fisher, proven to be an excellent defensive team, and they found a little bit of offense to go with it. They're starting to really mold into, the San Diego State of recent years, the teams that have had opportunities in the NCAA tournament to move a little bit. This team is coming along quite well for him. I think 12.5-point favorite, though. And off the game with UNLV, which was Saturday night, and a game where there was a lot of build-up. San Diego State went on the road. They just come off of a 2-point win, I think it was, against Nevada. And they turn around and they absolutely smoke UNLV by 12. Game really wasn't that close. Now you wonder, even though they're back home, Do they have it in them to go out and win by 13 points, cover the number? I think that's why guys have bet it down to 11.5 here. We see 134.5 holding steady where the total is concerned. Colorado State's been a defensive abomination this year, just not good on the defensive end. So San Diego State, if they really wanted to, probably could push pace a little bit and score with ease. Just not their style to do so. Don't know that I would like the total here, but I do know that, San Diego State, just even if you get them for a 5 or 6 minute stretch, they all of a sudden turn up the defense and you don't get anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. Don't want to lay this type of number here with San Diego State. Would probably rather take it with Colorado State considering the situation. That's what money's showing you now as they bet it down to 11.5 total. To me, just have to avoid that one. Don't have a good feel either way where that's concerned. We'll see if Colorado State can stay in it early. They might be able to hang around the entire distance because San Diego State's offense is not really one that puts you away. There's a couple more games left here. Utah State at Boise State. Boise State in need of a victory. Talk about teams that have fallen off the face of the earth. That would be Utah State. They do not resemble the Stu Morrill Utah State teams of years past. There's not a lot of defensive ability here. Boise State has that group of three-point shooters led by Drimmich, who can really stroke it, especially at home. An embarrassing loss on Saturday. I think you're going to see a big bounce-back performance out of Boise State in this one. There's something about Boise, too. When you watch them, there are games where they're a pretty good defensive team. When they really come with full focus and they come with their energy, they not only are a good offensive team, but they're a good defensive team, too. They can probably beat Utah State fairly well on each end of the floor here in a game where I figure that they'll be motivated to win. I think Boise State's probably the right side. Double digits with them can be small at times because they're able to ring up 80 points. So perhaps that's a way to look. I wouldn't be thrilled about laying the 10, but I think if given the choice of laying or taking here, I would rather lay the 10 with Boise State. Total at 151.5 probably is about right. If you take a look at the first half, Boise State 14-2 with 2 pushes straight up in the first half this season, 12-6 against the spread. Meanwhile, Utah State is a 6-10 team. Both of these teams played fairly well to the over as far as first half is concerned. I think Boise for the game, though, minus the 10, would be the way that if I was going to go play, I'd probably look to play it that way. Last game comes out of the Metro Atlantic Conference tonight. Rider against Manhattan. Rider opened as a 1-point favorite, remained as a 1-point favorite, total of 129.5. Now up to 131. I can understand it a little bit. Manhattan, while their coach's philosophy has always been to press, they're kind of a methodical team. They don't really get a ton of possessions consistently. Rider has become a little bit of a methodical team, a little more efficient on the offensive end than Manhattan has been. But this particular matchup, I think, the bettors have it right here. My first glance at this game, when I saw the opener, I'm speaking about the total now. When I saw the opener of 129.5, I thought that was probably a real good play over just based on the recent form of Rider. You take a look at Rider for their last 5 games, they've put up 75 points or more. They've got that kind of capability. Haven't shown it all season long, but in conference play, recently it's been getting better. For Manhattan, like I say, Rider's probably the more efficient offensive team. And for Manhattan, I think the biggest problem for them has been the slump on the defensive end. You look at this game, and you have to get a 67-65 game to get this one up and over. And once again, I just don't think that that's unreasonable. I would probably look at playing this one over 131. I think there's a cap on it. If it were to climb as high as, 133, you wouldn't want it anymore, but right now where it sits at 131, even though it's been pushed up a little bit, I still think there's value there in Ryder Manhattan over 131. That'll be it for your college basketball report for today. Join us back tomorrow. We'll come with a college hoop report or maybe an NBA report. Also fantasy reports upcoming here at Rob Veno Sports. Currently um, having client packages for fantasy sports. Our own Derek Davis actually finished #1 with Daily Overlay this season in NFL fantasy sports. Real good fantasy guys. So we'll put some fantasy reports up here as well. But for now, that's your college report for the day. This is Rob Veno saying good luck on all your bets. We'll talk to you tomorrow.